WRUU-LP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings Community Radio with Global Soul. Welcome to Muses, Memoirs, and More, Savannah's show about authors, artists, and entertainers. I'm your host, Adam Messer. And good afternoon, everybody. I'm your host, Adam Messer, and we're here with Muses, Memoirs, and More on WRUU-LP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, Community Radio with Global Soul. And today I wanted to introduce our guest. He was on last week briefly. His name is Winfield Strock III. For friends and family, everybody calls him Win. Win, how are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing great.
Thank you so much for coming back on. I know last week we had some technical difficulties where we couldn't get you on at the first part, and we had you on briefly at the end there. But I'm really happy to have you back on today so that we have a full hour to carry on the discussion. And so how's everything going?
It's going good. I'm getting some final bits together for Touching Butterflies. I'm excited about getting that out.
Oh, okay, cool. So so we can kind of backtrack a little bit, do you mind letting the new listeners know a little bit more about yourself and what you do? I kind of did a soft intro like on Facebook and that kind of stuff, but...
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, after 23 years in the Navy, I got out and realized that I kind of linked my identity to my profession. And I realized what a mistake that was because nothing really fit that as well as my Navy career. And even after I got over that, I realized that I wasn't just a sailor in the Navy. But anyhow, so I started writing because I was trying to find something that I was interested in, that I had enough passion for to work at it. And it's made everything else in my life just better because I feel like I have a purpose in my life that I'm working towards, and so as long as everything I'm doing works towards that, it makes everything more fulfilling.
Oh, that's really interesting. So, coming back around, like we were just talking last week, you said you had this new project that you're working on, Touching Butterflies, and you spoke about it just for a second, a few seconds ago, actually. What is that a new short story? Is that a new novel?
It's either a novella or a really long short story. I'm not sure which way that gets classified, but it's also an invitation. Imagine like a Twilight Zone episode that put one new twist on the way a world works, and then you invite other writers to write other Twilight Zone episodes that are set in that world with that one change. That's what Touching Butterflies is intended to be, is a bizarre, thought-provoking story that then hopefully provokes other people to write other stories that happen in that world.
Okay, cool. Yeah, we don't want to reveal the plot twist. So when are you expecting to put it out?
I'm hoping to have copies of it with me at the Savannah Quill in October, and I might have it out a little earlier than that, but definitely going to have it with me in October.
That's awesome. Can you also tell us about some of your other works that you have published?
Well, kind of my favorite is it's sort of a mixture of one of my favorite Stephen King novels and my career in the Navy on submarines. It's about a nuclear submarine in the middle of the Cold War with a vampire who's stowed up himself on board and intends to take over the submarine and just basically rule the oceans from there.
And what's that book called?
Oh, it's called Red Sounding. If Tom Clancy's Hunt for Red October and Stephen King's Salem's Lot, if those two books had a baby, this would be it.
That's cool. So, how did you get into writing? I know you said that you were working and it just kind of hit you, but how did you discover that you had a talent for writing and you had an interest for writing?
Well, some of it started really early. As a teenager, I got into gaming, playing games like D&D, and I found that I really enjoyed creating stories,
Yeah.
writing stories, and what's amazing about a game like D&D or these role-playing games is it's almost like a stand-up comic situation where you have an interactive audience while you're trying to tell a story, and you can tell when you're doing well with your storytelling, and you can tell when you bomb. And so you become addicted to the positive reactions. And then when I started trying to figure out who I was after 23 years in the Navy, I was like, what do I have? What kind of talents would I consider that I have? And I'm like, well, I'm a daydreamer. And, how do you turn that into a positive thing? Because a lot of times if you're just daydreaming at work, you're not getting any work done. People wonder what the heck you're doing with your brain. So I started writing some stories down. And it started off as a hobby, but once I discovered that I had a brain tumor and went through the surgery and the recovery from all of that, it just sort of automatically caused me to look at life's priorities differently. And that's when I decided to take this hobby that I did when I had spare time and try to build habits around it and try to do it on a regular basis and treat it more seriously.
When you say treat it more seriously, and obviously having a brain tumor is a pretty serious condition. I know last week we were talking about it, and I remember you said it was kind of like just another thing to schedule type thing.
The scheduling conflict, right.
Right. And so I thought that was a pretty stoic way to look at it. And, now you're over it. You're pretty healthy, right?
Yeah.
And you write a lot.
Well, yeah. I think that part of it comes from, if you're going to do something, you want to do the heck out of it. You want to do it the best you can. But I also, after finding my life's passion and getting on the other side of the whole brain tumor issue the way that I did, I like to encourage people to find something that they can do that makes them feel good about themselves and somehow, create something that other people can enjoy or other people can appreciate. And when you do that, I think you build bonds that just wouldn't exist otherwise.
I agree with you. I think that's like when we first met at the convention, you and I hit it off. We were talking a lot about writing, and and then we'd see each other once or twice a year. And then the last couple of years, we've met up for different events and things like that. But also you have your writing group that you facilitate. And, I think that you've been a big influence for me for writing, and then also kind of getting through those slumps, where you hit those periods where you're like, oh gosh, do I really want to do this? Or,
it can be tough, especially, the good habits really benefit from having good habits and bad both benefit from having a support group, whether you're talking about AA or you're talking about a workout partner or you're talking about a writing group. When you have people that can get positive results from this kind of support group, then you see those positive results in other people, and it makes you want to get the same thing out of it. And so when you're in the slump, it helps lift you up, and when you're up, it helps you help other people get out of their slump.
Yeah, like last week we were talking about that first draft syndrome. Your first draft, often you feel like it's not really that good.
Right, yeah, and it's inevitable, but even today I find myself sometimes thinking, well, I want to get this right the first time, and so I approach certain projects slower than I should. Even when I wrote Red Sounding, it was the fastest I'd ever written a book, and the biggest thing that I did differently was I started at the beginning and I just wrote and wrote and wrote until I got at the end, and I told myself I wasn't going to look back until it was a finished thing. Mm-hmm. And then once it's a finished thing, that's when you can look at the entire arc. You can look at the entire piece and see where the peaks and valleys are in it, and then start to adjust those.
So with that, and I love free writing, and I think it's really cool, that you wrote it and, just kind of, they say what, write quickly and then edit slowly type thing?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
excuse me. Do you outline your work, or I mean, do you kind of have a general idea of what you want in it, and how do you structure your writing?
It's different for each project. There are times where I do a lot of. In the beginning, I did a lot of outlining, and a lot of that came from my gaming experience in the past, because you have to know so much about what's ahead if you're going to run a game like that, because the players have the freedom to do things that characters don't.
Right.
I mean, the characters, you're pulling the strings on all the characters, so they do what you need them to do to make the plot work. But when you have people that are interacting with your environment, you realize that if you want certain results, you have to plot out certain motivating factors in order for that to happen. So I did a lot of outlining in the beginning, and then I did no outlining for red sounding, and I thought that was the key to success, was just don't outline ever again. And I found that that's not always the case. It depends on how well you know your story. I think red sounding had been sitting in my head in one form or another for a decade. And then on top of that, it was, like I said about the comparison between Hunt for Red October and Salem's Lot, I was drawing upon stories that already existed and putting them together with a twist. So I reread Salem's Lot, and I tried to pace red sounding similarly.
Okay.
So, one of the criticisms of red sounding, for example, one guy read it, and in his review, he said, "Well, they don't become vampires very soon. It takes too long for them to become vampires." But if you read Salem's Lot, you see that it is sort of this very slow, subtle infection of evil in a small, isolated community. And to me, that was a really good kind of creepy factor, was to have this place where people are sort of isolated, trapped, and they're very slowly realizing that something's not right. Mm-hmm. But it takes them a while to put together the fact that it's more than not all right. It's absolutely mind-bogglingly, evil and horrific.
I think that's part of with horror. You have the suspense of it. There's a build up, and you don't necessarily know what's going to happen. Seeing the monster isn't nearly as big a deal, I think, as building up the suspense to the moment when that happens. Right. Yeah, you get this kind of catch your breath type feeling.
Right.
So.
And you look at a movie like Psycho, and there's a skeleton in a dress in a rocking chair, and it doesn't show up until way, way, way late. Mm-hmm. And at that point, there's a lot of creepy stuff that's happened up until then, and there's no color. It's a black and white movie that still manages to scare you pretty well without having the gore factor.
Yeah, and Wynn, thank you for being on. For those of you just tuning in, this is Muses, Memoirs, and More. I'm your host, Adam Messer, and we're on WRUULP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with global soul. Today's guest is Winfield Strock III. He's an author. He also has a lot of experience with editing. He's a retired veteran from the Navy. And just to put it in short, he had a brain tumor and overcame that, is healthy now, but that affected his life, and he decided to become serious about his craft and writing, and he's published several books. He's working on a new project called Touching Butterflies. Who was the person you said you were working on with that?
Working with a guy that works with me in my day job, a fellow named Chip Lewis. He just reads all the time. He's a big reader, and so I thought, man, this is a great guy to give me some feedback on what I write. And so I invited him to join the writers group that we have down here in Camden. We call it Camden Quill. and he's just amazing in his ability to notice little details, to offer constructive, critical commentary on all kinds of just little bits and pieces at a time.
So he's kind of like an alpha reader for you?
Yeah, but he's also writing one of the stories that's going to follow up Touching Butterflies.
Okay, so he's a co-creator type thing.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's really cool. Speaking of the Camden Quill, I did want to touch on that a little bit later on in the segment. But with the writing group that you have, you organize different events and get-togethers and that kind of thing. But the premise with the writing group, it's mostly on Facebook, right?
Well, most of our members are on Facebook,
right,
but very few of them actually physically show up to the meetings.
Right, and, but people interact in the group and they post different things, and so I wanted to ask you about that. Like with that group, facilitating a writers group, what are some of the things that you find work, and what are some of the things that you find don't work?
Well, I think one of the things is to just kind of accept people where they're at in their writing. We have probably 60 members on the Facebook page, but I hear from probably a quarter of that many on a regular basis, and then of that quarter, maybe 4 or 5 people show up to the meetings at any given moment. We've had meetings that it's just me and one other person. We've had meetings where we've had 10 people, and everybody's got day jobs, and everybody has different levels of passion. They have different levels of investment in their writing, and not everybody that's a member of the Camden Quill is actually pursuing publication. Some of them just write for therapeutic purposes.
Okay, yeah. There's a lot of different ways that people enjoy writing. I know with me, I one of the things I enjoy is the interviewing part. You actually get to meet a lot of new people, and you get to pick their brain, about a lot of different things, and you kind of pull from different, I guess, skills and personalities, and you see what fits for you. And that's one of the things I like about this show is it gives an opportunity to be able to interview folks like you, to share that, because it's not a conversation. I mean, it's kind of weird. I think that there's so many different programs out there, hey, follow this formula, get your book published, yada, 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 or get your film out there, or whatever it is, right? There's so many programs that, they're selling subscriptions, or, there's a lot of free stuff out there, on YouTube and that kind of thing. But I think one of the things that I've noticed is that the behind the scenes kind of conversations, like how did you overcome having a brain tumor and decide that you wanted to write, that kind of thing, because that's a very interesting story to me, and I really like the fact that the show we can do that, and be able to to kind of explore some of those areas. And I think that's the same thing with writing. You like you said earlier, gaming, when you're playing a computer, it's going to be different than when you're playing against other people, or if you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, and you might have a new character that comes in, a new player. They're going to have a deviation of how they play versus the other group, the rest of the people in the group. And people are very clever, so a computer, you can kind of adapt and see how things are going to go. AI might be a little bit different now, but it's still kind of clunky, but humans are very clever,
But yeah, you can with the computer games, you can kind of learn what tricks the computer will fall for, and then you can string the computer along based on learning that from them. One of the things I think is kind of fascinating about the role-playing game aspect is it's almost being in an active writers group where some people will take different roles. I've had like one of the things that you run into in different gaming groups. I mean, 23 years in the Navy, moved to a lot of different towns, met a bunch of different group of people to game with. But one of the things that is fairly constant is you'll have that one player who's trying to figure out what your plot is before it unfolds and figure out how to sabotage it.
Yeah.
And I feel like Hollywood executives would benefit from hiring a guy just like that when they're looking at some of these scripts, because you look at some of the plots and you're like, well, why is that happening? And why aren't the main characters choosing a different path or doing something, very simple that would make this whole movie, not even happen?
Yeah, I think that I've heard a term before called like rules lawyers, where the whole premise that they want to do is just kind of ruin the game for other people by exploiting rules or exploiting the game, and they, for some reason or another, they like doing that kind of thing. And you get people that are very hypercritical, like that.
Right.
And I think it is it's a good skill to have, to kind of pick and figure out, like, okay, well, this isn't working. I think there's also some tact that needs to be involved. Sometimes you
not just the rules, but some of the plots. When you say, okay, well, I want these characters to go after this MacGuffin, and then you don't put adequate obstacles in the way of choosing another path.
Right.
And when you're in a role-playing game, those people say, well, imagine, like, say, The Wizard of Oz, for example. At any point, Dorothy could have said, oh, okay, well, the person that's making up this story wants me to go on this yellow brick road so that, I can meet these challenges. Well, what if I just don't go on the yellow brick road?
Right.
What if I just stay in Munchkin Land and, try to pump these guys for more, equipment for my journey or information about, who I'm dealing with? But no, they just, force run it. And the better something is written, the less likely people watching the show, reading the book, or playing in the game are going to see a logical way to subvert the plot.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we all like a surprise. Yeah, I think we all like a twist. There's a lot of formulaic stuff out there, and you just kind of go along and you see it and you're like, oh, but I think we all like that little plot twist, or like, oh,
right.
I didn't see that coming, or
that's one of the things that, for example, in the first Deadpool movie, I think it was, in the credits of both of the Deadpool movies, he has some, you're looking at the credits, but in the credits are sort of like jokes or an homage, for example. One of the things that it says in the credits is, it says, starring the writers, and then underneath that it says, like, the real heroes. And you look at Hollywood and you see that the people that get paid the most money are the people that look pretty in front of a camera and pretend to be somebody that they aren't. Whereas the people that write the stories, how many writers do you know by name today that are, making these great movies and stuff? Not that many. But if you look back in time, you say, okay, well, think back over the last 1,000 years and name 10 writers. That's pretty easy to do. But name 10 actors over the past 1,000 years, besides the one that tried to assassinated Lincoln, there aren't too many. So it seems like Hollywood's got things upside down, and they don't know it.
Yeah, I think with the writing and, going back to, going back to the plot twists, and, there's a lot of stuff out there. And I think that's one of the things with the indie writers, like you're an indie writer. I know you were published with a small publishing press before. But with the indie writers, I think that it gives them a lot of freedom of choice on how they want to, kind of break the system or break the rules per se. And you have to know the rules to break the rules, right? But sometimes people they jump into it not even knowing the rules or how things work, and so they don't realize that they're not, like you said, you wouldn't put the skeleton in the dress at the beginning of Psycho, because then there wouldn't be a movie. You know what I mean?
Right.
It would just be like, oh, well, that's his mother, and Norman is, just kind of a creepy guy. So, but I think that's one of the things with indie writers, and there's a lot of people that, especially with YouTube and other outlets, that are making their own independent film. They're doing collaborative works where they've got local people they just want to get into production,
Right.
And I think the same thing with writing, that you get a lot of people that they were an aspiring writer, but they just didn't know the tools, and they didn't know how to, break into that area other than just starting to just write or whatever. Can you hold that thought for just a second, Win?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks. I want to tell everybody out there about our summer business auction that we have going on for WRUU. WRUU 107.5 FM's summer business auction is right around the corner. Now's your time to donate a gift card or certificate for a product or service to be auctioned off in an online catalog next month. If your business uses gift cards or certificates, or if you can donate a gift card or certificate in any way, please let us know. Your donation will help Savannah's community radio station continue to provide unique music and talk programs that you enjoy. To donate a gift card or certificate, email fundraising@wruu.org. That's fundraising@wruu.org. Thank you for listening to and supporting WRUU. So, back to you, Wen. We've been talking today, everybody. If you're just joining us, we've been talking today with Winfield Strock III. He is an author. He also facilitates a writing group called the Camden Quill. He's working on a new project called Touching Butterflies, which is going to be coming out in the next couple of months. And we've been talking today about the writing process, and we've got our station break coming up in a couple minutes here. When you were, what would you ideally like to see? You were talking about some of the writers don't get enough credit type thing, and there's a lot of writers that work on different projects or whatever. And what would you like to see if you had, if you were able to make a change? What would you think would be a better way to handle it?
Well, I just remember watching a movie recently. I think it was The Last Jedi, and I was thinking to myself, man, it seems to me like what they should do with some of these scripts is get some of the cheapest costumes possible and get the actors and just film it as cheaply as possible, just going through the scenes with actors reading their lines and no special effects. And you just do it, just do one quick run through and then watch that and see if it makes sense without the special effects dazzling you, without the costumes drawing your attention, and just see if the words make sense. But I don't know. I think that they've gotten blind to that. Back in I want to say it was the 90s, back when reality TV first became a thing. It became a thing because of a writer's strike. And rather than make a deal with the writers, they said, "Well, we gotta fill the airwaves with something. We'll do reality TV." And so you just do clever editing of your footage, and you make drama whether it was actually there or not. And they haven't really looked back since then. So I feel like writing has kind of shrank over that, over the time that's happened. And now it's largely simplified stuff. But you look at something like Netflix originals, some Amazon Prime originals. If you've ever seen Stranger Things from Netflix, that is awesome.
Yeah.
I feel like there's Little Hollywood is making a comeback in terms of good writing.
That's really cool. Hold that thought, Wen.
Yep.
We're going to be back in about 2 minutes for the station break. Everybody tuning in, thank you for listening to us. I'm your host, Adam Messer, and this is Muses, Memoirs, and More. We're on WRUULP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with global soul. And we'll be back in about 2 minutes. Stay tuned with our station announcements.
The Savannah Folk Music Society offers a concert the first Friday of every month at 7:30 p.m. at First Presbyterian Church on Washington Avenue in Savannah. You can find information about their next concert at their website, www.savannahfolk.org.
Listen to the best eclectic mix of music on Evening Eclectic on Sundays from 10 to midnight on WRUU-LP, Savannah, Georgia.
WRUU brings you the most diverse and passionate local radio programming on the air in Savannah. This all-volunteer and nonprofit community radio station accepts no money from any form of government. Our diversity and independence is made possible only through the generous financial support of listeners like you. We rely on your annual and ongoing monthly contributions to cover the many costs associated with bringing you our broadcast and web programming. If you are a contributor, thank you. If you are not yet a contributor, please show your appreciation of the role WRUU plays in your life by becoming a contributor in any amount. You can donate quickly and easily by credit card or check. Just find the donate and subscribe links at wruu.org. Thanks for listening to and supporting WRUU.
WRUU-LP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with global soul.
And welcome back, everybody. I'm your host, Adam Messer, and you're listening to WRUU-LP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with global soul. And today's show of Muses, Memoirs, and More, our guest is Winfield Strock III. Win, are you still there with us?
Oh, yeah.
All right, great. So the first segment, we were talking about writing. We were talking about, your background, and we were just talking about Little Hollywood. And this second half, I'd like to kind of pick your brain about the nuts and bolts of the writing process, and then also with the publishing. So with your idea for Red Soundings, you said that you kind of sped wrote through it, right? And
yeah.
You skipped doing an outline for it because you had done an outline before, and you found that that abandoning an outline is not exactly the way you want to do it, but doing an entire. So, what is your process like now? That you've been writing about 10 years or so with publishing and all. What's that process like now? Because you're working on your new project called Touching Butterflies, and you said it's going to be either a short story or a novella, depending on how it ends up. What's that process like now? Like, can you kind of walk us through what a day in the life is with your writing, with how you do it?
Okay, well, I don't do that much outlining anymore, but sometimes I'll do what I call reverse outlining, where I'll come up with a concept for a story, and then I'll write some of it, and then I have to figure out where it's going to go from there. But I still believe that the best thing to do is to start at the beginning and end at the end, and then look at it afterwards. But I also recognize that for as many writers as there are in the world, there are that many different ways to approach it. I don't think that you can have somebody tell you that something is definitely right or definitely wrong about how to approach writing, so much as they can tell you if something definitely works or doesn't work as a story.
So what works for you as a story?
Well, I think you need to have something at risk. You need to have stakes. You need to have, and when I say action, I don't mean like, explosions and Michael Bay movies and that kind of stuff. But
right.
Things need to move forward, and they need to happen to the characters, and the characters, they have to be characteristic. I read one of the things I read when I was learning how to write was it says when you introduce a character, introduce them doing something characteristic. So if there's a purpose that a character is going to serve, when you introduce them, they should show you some example of that characteristic. I'm getting a little off the topic, but yeah. So you
well, no, it's the nuts and bolts. So like this is all part of the process.
Right. So in the same way, and what I've found is I'll write a story, and then afterwards I'll be able to sort of compare it to stories that I already know exist. Like my first novel was a steampunk novel, but in it the protagonist that it exists at the end was not the protagonist in the beginning. Instead, he was a guy who was a Civil War veteran who was sort of adverse to violence. He was not the kind of guy that would start a fight, but he got teamed up with a guy who was, to me, was sort of a Clint Eastwood sort of character. Sort of, didn't say a whole lot, but he acted often, and he was the kind of guy who was quick to make the tough decisions and act accordingly. And sometimes that led to violent ends. But by the time that character kind of faded out of the center spotlight, our main protagonist has learned from him how to make those tough decisions and how acting quickly and concretely is important.
And I think action, they talk about showing versus telling, right? And
it's good and bad.
Well, I think there's times for both.
Right. And some people, I think they've heard the show don't tell so much that they think there's no place for telling.
Mm-hmm.
But there are some scenes and there are some events that you want to just kind of skim over until you get to the part where something happens again. You'll see scenes in movies where at the end of the scene you're like, well, what did that mean? What did that do? And you don't need to know that your hero, went home and took a shower and ate some Cheetos and watched some Netflix before he got back into his, crime scene investigation the next day.
Yeah, one often scene that I see a lot is like the next morning, like the characters waking up, in movies and stuff like that, and you just assume from their surroundings what happened the night before. If there's there's party stuff or whatever. And I think sometimes with the showing, not telling, you can, you can almost do a little overkill with action and active tense, and overly descriptive words. I've always liked the book The Old Man and the Sea, and I love the simplistic language. I think that you can craft a story, but you don't have to be overly superfluous with words to use to use an example of a word not to use, right?
Well, no, I mean, I think that there are some words that you don't find in the average tweet or text, but they're succinct in their use.
Right.
They take the place of 4 or 5 words, and your average person who made it through high school should probably know what that word is. But like my dad was trying to tell me recently, he says, I think you need to write sort of like you speak.
Yeah.
And I think there are times where I don't do that, and part of it comes from, well, first of all, one of my favorite books is Dune, and I found myself as a kid reading Dune, going back to dictionaries, over and over again to try to figure out what some of those words were.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think Stephen King is sort of a plain speaker in terms of how he writes. I don't know. I'm losing my train of thought now.
But I think when you're talking about language, we have 800,000 words or so in the English language. People often use about 80,000 of those in written language, and they use about 8,000 of those, I think I heard as a statistic one time, in vocal language, right?
Right.
And so we simplify our thoughts into words. And
so I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
But one of the things that I've gotten into a discussion with lately is what I call non-descriptive descriptives. Like the word beautiful. What does that mean?
Yeah, it's
I mean,
overused.
It means beautiful,
right.
But in the same way that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, when you use the word beauty, it doesn't really tell you a whole lot. It tells you that if you were to see it, that you would like it, I guess, but it doesn't give you an idea of whether or not what you're looking at is blue or green, soft or hard, metallic or wooden, those kind of things.
Right. Right. It doesn't give any characteristics of it other than it's beautiful.
Yeah. So if you say something is beautiful or horrific or exciting, there are some words that you'll see in writing that they don't really. It's like they're trying to tell you to feel a certain way, but they don't make you feel a certain way. When you describe a character who is going through something that is terrifying, if you were to describe your own symptoms of being terrified, I think that's more to the point. When you describe someone gripping the wheel of a car, white-knuckled, sweating, breathing in short, rapid breaths, then ideally what that does is that gets the reader to kind of start doing the same thing. Or, like, in the best scenes, I'll end up kind of tensing my hand as I'm going through the scene because I'm feeling the tension that they're trying to portray.
And that's almost like method acting, right?
I don't know that much about method acting, so I'll take your word for it.
It sounds kind of like it because with method acting, they get into the emotions of the character, and
Right.
And I'm not an expert in it. I just think it's really interesting that you would kind of mimic, what your character is going through physically.
Yeah.
And that way you can, manifest those feelings or those thoughts or emotions or whatever. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, well, plus, if you're writing from that kind of mindset, then it puts you in the perspective of the character that you're writing about. And so there are little details that I think come from it. Like when I was writing the opening scene for Red Sounding, it's this Soviet soldier who is walking through 3 foot of snow, and when you say 3 foot of snow, that's deep snow. But when I write it as groin deep snow, I think that triggers a certain reaction, at least in me, as I'm reading it, because I can remember walking out to my grandfather's farm in snow that was so deep that my dad had to pick me up and carry me the rest of the way.
Oh, wow.
And you just get so cold.
I remember there's a blizzard. Growing up in Cincinnati, we had a blizzard. I think it was in '78. I might have been like 2 years old, but I just remember that was like my first memory of snow. And well, I remember we were at the bank, and the bank, my grandpa, my dad, and my uncle were helping push cars out of the bank parking lot because people couldn't, they couldn't get out. And
right.
But yeah, I could imagine. I mean, snow that deep. Give me 1 second here. Let me just do this station announcement. So if you're just now tuning in to us, thank you. My name's Adam Messer, and you're listening to Muses, Memoirs, and More. We're on WRUULP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with global soul. And if you are just now tuning in, our guest today is Winfield Strock III. Win is an author. He does a lot of work editing. He also facilitates a writing group. And so today we've just been talking a lot about the creative process, writing, his new work that he's coming out with soon called Touching Butterflies. And so we really appreciate having you on today, Win. So we were just talking about how with your writing process, using words in a way that not only describe what the character is doing, but also immerse the reader into the feelings and the thoughts of the character. And how do you transition from one scene to the next with that? Because that can be kind of difficult. I think that's one of the most difficult things for me is, you might say, well, he was angry. And that's, telling, right?
Right.
But if you say, he balled his fist up and punched a hole through the wall and screamed and kicked the wall.
Right.
You get the idea that he's angry. You know what I mean? Versus telling somebody he was angry. What is that transition like for you when you're working on different scenes with characters and interactions with characters?
Well, I think some people they're like, well, how can you write a whole book? How can you write 80,000, 90,000 words? And just to quote, one of my favorite books, you just take it one line at a time. You take it bird by bird, as Anne Lamott's book title says. You just take it a little bit at a time. And in the same way that as a scene has a beginning, a middle, and end, and has sort of an arc to it, scenes become chapters, chapters become novels. And in terms of the transition part, I think that you have to kind of set people in a setting and give them an idea of what it's about, and then drive some tension, drive some drama between the characters, and then have it end, kind of like I liken it to comedy in that you want to have sort of a punchline at the end, some sort of emotional satisfaction that something has happened and now it is over, and it is obvious that it's over, so that when you go from that to a scene break to something else, you're like, oh, okay, that bite of this meal of a story is over, and I'm on to the next thing.
So they can feel satisfied if they need to put the book down, or
right, right,
and they can come back, later on.
Right, but at the same time, you want to make them
want to come back,
wonder what happens with that.
Right. You want to make them. You kind of leave the hook out there.
Right.
Yeah, and that's the other thing too with creating that the drama. We have the freedom as writers to do whatever we want, right?
Yeah.
But sometimes
you
creating that
don't,
drama.
Because, in the beginning, you sort of establish a world, if you will. You establish characters and what they will and won't do to accomplish their goals. And if you're writing science fiction or you're writing fantasy, you're writing something that doesn't exist. If you're going to let people buy into this whole suspension of disbelief business, you have to state your rules sort of effectively and then stick to your own rules as you go through it.
Right.
Because if there are no rules, then anything could happen, and then nothing is surprising, and nothing is solid enough for people to kind of rest on as they're going through the drama.
Right. All right. Changing the subject just a little bit, I want to talk, as we were talking earlier, about talking about the publishing process. So,
yeah.
We've got about another 8 minutes or so of the show before we go to those station announcements. With that publishing, you were published with a small publishing press, right?
Yeah.
What was that like? Can you walk us through how that happened?
It's probably the least interesting story I can tell because it was too easy. I happen to know somebody back home that I would see in West Virginia around Christmas time. I told him I had a manuscript that I thought was ready, and he says, well, I happen to know a publisher, and she can look at it and let you know if it's ready. So I sent it to her, and she sends me an email back, and she says, not only is it ready, but we would like to publish it. So I'm super excited. And then I decide, well, this sounds too good to be true. I'm going to look these people up. And turns out they do romance and erotic romance. I'm like, man, that is not me. But I decided that I would take their yes rather than swim through a bunch of no's. And so I went with it. And I joke with people sometimes that the naughtiest part of any of my works are the disclaimers that originally came in Rebel Ink Press books before they got rid of the erotic part.
Okay. So with that, you had the book out, and then there's the promotion side of publishing. So you basically have to put the word out there to people.
Yeah, and not being educated in that or having a natural acumen for it, it's tough because you're like, well, I'm going to do this, and this will help, and then you don't see the results in your book sales, and you say, well, that didn't work. And it might be that it would work if you kept doing it, but you just don't know. So what I tried to do was I tried to marry the things that I wanted to do with the things that I had to do. So I went to sci-fi conventions, and I would share my steampunk stuff there. And what I loved about it was you get to meet people that are interested in the same thing you're interested in. You get to kind of geek out about, the things that you like in, say, science fiction, or you like in literature, you like in movies, and so you get to do that at the same time you're promoting your work.
What was something that you found after doing, conventions and that kind of thing that was a little surprising that you thought would work and didn't work? And then what was something that you thought, didn't really think anything of it, and it actually, turned out really well for you?
Well, I'm going to start with the second part first, because I don't feel like I've really found anything that has worked really well for me. But the I tried getting T-shirts for the Red Sounding, because I thought that Red Sounding was going to be like the thing that would get me, somewhere.
And
it hasn't happened
I
yet.
actually have one of the T-shirts. So I actually own one of them, and it's pretty cool.
Oh man, but I was just so excited about sharing that story with folks that, and when you talk to people, they definitely sound interested, but I don't know what it takes to make it to the next level.
Let me share a story about the T-shirt, though.
Yeah.
I remember I got this shirt, and I wore it, and I kept having people ask me if I was a communist.
Oh wow!
And I was, you remember we talked about that, and I was like, no, it's a horror fantasy novel, and the guy's on a Soviet submarine, and I literally had people stopping me and asking me if I was a communist or something like that, and I was like, no, I'm not a communist. It's just but it was that convincing. The shirt,
right.
Was that convincing, and you look on the back of it, and they don't really read the back. They just see the scythe and the hammer on the front, and they see Red Sounding, and it's like, very Soviet type feeling, and but that was a kind of a weird little odd thing that happened to me. I wore the shirt, didn't even think about it, and here I am like, oh, this is a cool shirt. My friend, Wynn put it out and that kind of thing, and and so sometimes you have unexpected consequences, and so it was one of those things that I thought was kind of a neat little sidebar.
I think the one thing that I got good at was what they call the elevator pitch, where you try to boil down what you're selling to people or what you're trying to promote to people to the shortest little blurb possible. Because when you're at those conventions and people are just pouring through there, looking at all different kinds of things, you need to be able to, as they're walking by at a leisurely pace, explain to them what it is in such a way that they stop and they come ask more questions.
Right.
And so, that's where I came up with the idea of what's on the back of the T-shirt, Soviet submarine vampire. And I put that on the back of the novel so that from 10 feet away, you see those letters that are, 2.5 inches long, or tall rather, and it kind of draws folks in.
Yeah.
But also to talk about Red Sounding as a book that is the marriage or the child of, Salem's Lot and Hunt for Red October. If people know what those books are, it puts them in what the book is about right away. If they don't, of course, obviously it doesn't work.
And when we're getting ready to wrap it up, thank you so much for being on the show today. And where can people check out more information about your writing and your books?
Well, they can look me up by name on Amazon, or they can find me on Facebook. The Camden Quill is a closed group, just because I'm trying to give the writers in the Camden Quill just a little bit of kind of a privacy buffer while they're trying to get these works out. Because, as you know, first drafts tend to be pretty shaky, and so we get those out in that kind of environment. But folks that reach out to me there, then I can end up sending them an invite to the Camden Quill, and then we can work together on whatever they're writing.
That's awesome. Do you mind if I throw your website out there too?
No, go right ahead.
Titaniumbrain.com.
Yep.
I think that's a really neat, especially with your backstory. I think it's a really neat website named titaniumbrain.com. With the brain tumor and you overcoming all that. So thank you very much, Win, for being on today with us, and I appreciate you coming on. Everybody, you've been listening to Muses, Memoirs, and More. I'm your host, Adam Messer.